How do you think? Most people have never been asked that question. We've been told what to think, we've been trained what to memorize, we've even been rewarded for how quickly we can answer, but almost no one teaches us how to think. And yet, that's the skill that changes everything. See, most of us go through life thinking we're thinking, when really, we're just reacting. We wake up, read the news, check our phones, scroll through opinions, and subconsciously absorb what we're supposed to care about, what we should be angry about, what we're supposed to believe. And because it feels normal, because everyone else is doing it, we call it thinking. But it's not. It's a kind of mental autopilot. It's awareness without intention, and that's not enough. Thinking correctly begins with awareness, not answers, awareness. Imagine this. There's a firefighter who walks into a building engulfed in flames, smoke everywhere, visibility near zero. He moves through the chaos, not because he knows exactly what will happen, but because he's trained to stay aware. He doesn't panic, he observes, he listens, he feels the heat, and based on his awareness, he makes decisions. Good thinking doesn't start with certainty, it starts with presence. That's what correct thinking really is. The ability to pause, to see, to sense beyond just what's obvious. Awareness gives you the distance from your thoughts so you can actually question them. But here's the problem. Our culture doesn't reward awareness. It rewards reaction. The fastest reply wins, the loudest voice is heard. The one who posts first gets the likes. That's the environment we're trained in. So we live in a world where speed is mistaken for intelligence, and certainty is mistaken for clarity. But thinking correctly is not about being the first to speak. It's about being the last to revise. I once met a leader who built a wildly successful company. But when you spoke to him, you noticed something strange. He didn't respond right away. He waited. He would nod, pause, and even in the middle of a fast-paced meeting, he'd take a breath before saying anything. And when he did speak, it was always meaningful, always clear. I asked him once why he did that, and he said something I'll never forget. I never want to be the smartest person in the room. I just want to be the one who's paying the most attention. Think about that. The most attention. Awareness, not assumption. And it's that kind of awareness that separates great thinkers from clever talkers. Most of us are running around trying to win arguments, prove points, sound smart. And we miss the whole point of thinking, to understand. Not to be right, but to understand. And understanding takes humility. It takes slowing down. It takes the willingness to not jump to conclusions, even when the world is begging us to. When a problem shows up, how do you respond? Most people immediately ask, what do I do? But correct thinking starts with a different question. What am I not seeing? When we ask better questions, we get better outcomes. A friend of mine was leading a team that was struggling. Performance was down, morale was low, and they were losing clients. Every leader before him had tried the same formula. Tighter control, more reporting, louder motivation. But it never worked. When he stepped in, he didn't start with answers. He started with listening. He spent the first few weeks not fixing, but noticing. He sat with people. He asked questions. He walked through their day to day. And what he realized was this. The issue wasn't laziness, it was confusion. People weren't disengaged. They were uncertain. They didn't know what mattered most. Once that clarity was established, performance turned around. But that only happened because he chose awareness. Correct thinking is not glamorous. It doesn't always show up in quick wins or brilliant sound bites. It's quiet, it's patient, it asks, why am I thinking this? Who told me this was true? What if the opposite is also worth considering? That's the mindset of a real thinker. Not someone looking for comfort, but someone searching for truth. And that doesn't mean living in analysis paralysis. It means learning to see your own lens. When we think we already know everything, we shut out the ability to learn. But when we become aware of how we form our opinions, how we make decisions, how we jump to conclusions, that's when we become powerful. Because now we're not just reacting to the world, we're engaging with it. Thoughtfully, intentionally. Awareness gives us back our power. It makes us less reactive to fear, less prone to emotional hijacks, less vulnerable to manipulation. And here's the key. The more aware we are, the more aligned we can be. And alignment is where great decisions come from, not just decisions that work, but decisions that matter. There's a story about a sculptor who was asked how he created such lifelike figures from stone. He said, I don't create the statue, I just chip away everything that's not it. And that's what correct thinking is. It's not always about adding more information. It's about removing distraction, removing bias, removing ego, so the truth can emerge. We don't need more noise. We need more clarity. And clarity starts with awareness. So the next time you face a decision, ask yourself not what's the answer, but what am I paying attention to? Are you reacting to pressure or responding to purpose? Are you repeating what you've heard or noticing what's actually true? Are you thinking to be right or to understand? The skill of thinking correctly won't show up on a resume, it won't trend on social media, but it will change how you lead, how you learn, it will shift your relationships, sharpen your decisions, and shape the future you build. Because when you train yourself to begin with awareness, everything changes. Not just what you think, but who you become. Thinking correctly begins not with control, but with curiosity. Not with answers, but with attention. That's the one skill that changes everything. Two people can look at the same situation and see something completely different. One sees a dead end, the other sees a challenge. One sees a mistake, the other sees a lesson. The situation is the same, but the outcomes couldn't be more different. What makes the difference? Perspective. And perspective, more than intelligence or experience or even talent, is what defines whether we move forward or stay stuck. The most powerful thinkers I've met aren't the ones with the best degrees or the sharpest skills. They are the ones who choose how they see. They don't wait for perfect circumstances to think clearly. They don't get trapped in what ifs. They shape their thoughts by shaping their perspective. And that's not a gift. It's a discipline. You can't always choose your situation, but you can always choose how you interpret it. And that's where your power lives. Not in the facts themselves, but in the frame you place around them. I remember talking to a young entrepreneur whose business had just failed. He was devastated. He'd lost money, confidence, and more than a little hope. He told me, I guess I'm not cut out for this. I paused, then asked him a question. What if the point wasn't to win, but to learn what not to do next time? What if this wasn't a failure, but a first draft? He looked at me, confused. How is that supposed to help me? I said, it won't change what happened, but it will change what happens next. That's the thing most of us miss. Perspective doesn't change the past. It reshapes the future. When you start to think from a place of purpose instead of panic, clarity follows, and from that clarity, better decisions emerge. Thinking correctly starts with this idea: you are not your circumstances, you are not your mistakes, you are not your environment. You are the one who interprets them. And when you interpret from a place of curiosity, compassion, and courage, you begin to see new possibilities where others only see problems. Most people live in a reactive mindset. Something happens, they react. They get a bad review, they get angry. They're told no, they feel rejected. They hear criticism and they shut down. But correct thinking requires something different. It requires stepping back and asking, what else could be true here? What am I missing? What if this isn't about me? That shift from reacting to reflecting turns your perspective into a superpower. It doesn't make life easier, but it does make you stronger. I once met a Navy commander who told me that in the most high-pressure missions, his number one job was to manage perspective, not tactics, not strategy. Perspective. He said, when the team starts focusing on the problem, we get stuck. But when we focus on the bigger picture, we stay aligned, we think better, we act smarter. He trained his people not to just ask what's going wrong, but to ask what still matters. That kind of mental leadership doesn't come from force. It comes from clarity. And clarity always begins with perspective. A storm can destroy a ship, or it can sharpen the crew. The storm doesn't decide that, the crew does. The weather's neutral, it's how you respond that makes the difference. And how you respond depends on how you think. And how you think depends on how you see. So how do we build a better perspective? We start by noticing our lens. We start by being honest about the stories we're telling ourselves. Every single day we're narrating our experiences. The meeting didn't go well, so we say, they don't respect me. We didn't get the job, so we say, I'm not good enough. But what if we're wrong? What if it wasn't about you? What if the person across the table was having a bad day? What if the opportunity just wasn't the right fit? What if the lesson isn't about failure, but timing? When we shift the story, we shift the outcome. Now let's be clear, this isn't about blind optimism. It's not about pretending everything is good. It's about practicing disciplined thought. It's about choosing to look for meaning even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Because those are the moments that define us. Correct thinking isn't passive. It's not something that happens to you. It's something you practice. And like any practice, it's uncomfortable at first. Your mind will want to revert to blame, to doubt, to fear. But every time you choose to reframe instead of react, you build strength, you build wisdom, you build resilience. I've seen people go through the worst kinds of pain, loss, betrayal, disappointment, and come out not bitter, but deeper. Not harder, but wiser. How? They didn't let the pain define the story. They chose a different lens. They said, this will shape me, not break me. That's the power of perspective. It turns chaos into clarity. It turns endings into beginnings. Correct thinking is really about seeing life through the lens of growth. When something goes wrong, ask, what is this teaching me? When you feel frustrated, ask, what do I care about that's being challenged? When you feel stuck, ask, what belief might be holding me here? Perspective is a mirror. It reflects not just the world, but our inner world. And when we change that reflection, the external world often shifts too. Not because it magically gets easier, but because we start to see the next step more clearly. It's easy to think the world controls us, that the economy, the algorithm, the culture decides our direction. But the truth is, we get to decide how we navigate. We get to choose whether we lead with fear or with meaning, with assumption or with intention. And here's what's beautiful. Your perspective doesn't have to be perfect to be powerful. It just has to be intentional. You don't have to always know the answer. You just have to be willing to change the way you see the problem. So the next time you find yourself feeling overwhelmed or uncertain, remember this. You may not control the waves, but you can adjust the sail. You can pause. Breathe, step back, and ask yourself the one question that great thinkers always ask. What's the bigger picture here? Because your power lies in your perspective, and when you learn to think from a higher one, everything begins to change. We all walk around carrying invisible scripts, assumptions we didn't choose, beliefs we didn't test, ideas we absorbed without ever questioning where they came from. And yet these assumptions quietly shape every decision we make, how we lead, how we work, how we treat others, how we say ourselves. Most people don't even know they're doing it. We say things like, that's just how things are, or that's the way we've always done it, as if those statements close the conversation. But that's not thinking, that's following, that's defaulting to what's familiar rather than exploring what's possible. Correct thinking requires courage. And that courage starts with being willing to challenge our own assumptions, especially the ones we're most certain about. There's a story I love about a young executive who walked into his first big strategy meeting. He'd just joined the team, eager, fresh, and full of ideas. The topic was about launching a product into a new market. The room was filled with experienced leaders. He noticed early in the meeting that everyone seemed to be in agreement, except him. The plan was to roll out fast, with heavy investment up front. It sounded impressive, but something felt off. He raised his hand and said, why are we assuming this audience wants the same thing our current customers do? The room went silent. A few people exchanged glances, and then one senior leader said, because that's how it's always worked. Now, most people would have backed off. Most people would have assumed that challenging that logic would be disrespectful, but he didn't. He politely asked, what if it doesn't work this time? The question lingered. Eventually, they ran a small test, and the results proved him right. The assumption was wrong. If they had moved forward without questioning it, they would have lost millions. Here's the truth. Assumptions are shortcuts. We all use them. We have to. Our brains are wired to simplify. We rely on past experiences, patterns, and internal narratives to help us navigate life. But when those assumptions go unexamined, they become blind spots. And blind spots are dangerous, not because we can't see, but because we think we do. We assume a coworker is lazy because they miss deadlines, but maybe they're overwhelmed or unclear about priorities. We assume a customer is being difficult, but maybe they just don't feel heard. We assume we're bad at something because we failed once, but maybe we just needed a better approach. Correct thinking doesn't mean doubting everything. It means testing your beliefs. It means holding your ideas with open hands, not closed fists. It means staying humble enough to say, I might be wrong, not as a weakness, but as a strength. Because only those who admit they might be wrong are capable of being truly right. We admire people who are confident, decisive, bold, but we forget that behind every wise decision is someone who first said, wait, let's look again. Great leaders don't just have answers, they question everything, especially the things they think they already know. There was a time when people believed the earth was the center of the universe. It wasn't because they were stupid. It's because everyone believed it. The assumption was so ingrained, no one thought to question it until someone did. And that changed everything. What else are we assuming today that might be wrong? About leadership, about success, about people who think differently than we do. Correct thinking starts by getting curious. When someone disagrees with you, instead of defending your point, ask yourself, what do they see that I don't? When something doesn't go as planned, instead of blaming the outcome, ask, what assumptions led me here? When you feel resistance to a new idea, ask, is this discomfort because it's wrong or because it's unfamiliar? That's the test. Many of the things we reject aren't actually bad, they're just different. And we confuse different with dangerous. But real danger lies in stagnation, in never updating our thinking, in refusing to evolve. I once met a teacher who had been in education for over 30 years. You'd think he would be set in his ways. But he told me something remarkable. He said, every year I try to challenge one major belief I have about teaching. Not because I want to be wrong, but because I want to grow. That mindset didn't just make him a better educator, it made him a better human being. When we challenge assumptions, we unlock possibility. We see options we didn't know were there. We create room for innovation, for empathy, for insight. We stop operating on autopilot and start designing with intention. But here's the catch. Challenging assumptions is uncomfortable. It requires vulnerability. It means being willing to sit in the space of not knowing. And for many of us, that feels like weakness. But it's not. That discomfort is where growth lives. Think of it this way. A tree grows strongest not when it's comfortable, but when it's exposed to wind. The resistance builds depth. Same with our thinking. When we question what we've always believed, we're not losing ground, we're gaining depth. We live in a world obsessed with being right. But correct thinking isn't about being right, it's about getting it right. And that difference matters. Being right is ego. Getting it right is humility. It means we're willing to let go of ideas that no longer serve us so we can adopt ones that do. So the next time you find yourself clinging to a belief, ask yourself, where did this come from? Did I choose this? Did I test it? Or did I just absorb it? And if it turns out you've been wrong, celebrate that. Because every assumption you break is one less wall between you and the truth. Correct thinking doesn't live in what's comfortable. It lives in what's honest. And honesty begins with ourselves, with the courage to say, maybe I don't know. Maybe there's a better way, because the thinkers who change the world aren't the ones who know the most. They're the ones who are willing to unlearn. And that's the kind of thinking that changes everything. There's a story I heard once about a man planting a tree. It was a quiet afternoon, and he was carefully placing the sapling into the soil, pressing the earth down gently, watering it with steady hands. Someone walked by and asked him, "Why are you planting that? You'll never sit under its shade." The man smiled and said, "That's true, but someone will." That's the essence of long-term thinking. It's not about what you get today, it's about what you build over time. It's about showing up today not for applause, not for results, but for the sake of something bigger than yourself. Something that might take years or even a lifetime to bear fruit. But we don't live in a world that celebrates that kind of thinking. We live in a world that worships the now, instant results, fast answers, quick wins, one click, one swipe, one solution. And in that environment, thinking long-term feels slow, it feels risky, it feels inefficient. But here's the paradox. The people who make the biggest impact, the ones who admire, the ones who leave something behind, they're the ones who think years ahead and act with urgency today. That's the balance. That's what correct thinking looks like. Thinking long-term doesn't mean you wait around. It means you plant seeds with intention and tend to them with patience. And one of the biggest mistakes we make is confusing motion with progress. Just because you're busy doesn't mean you're building. Just because you're working hard doesn't mean you're working smart. When we don't have a long-term vision, our actions become scattered. We chase what's loudest instead of what's most meaningful. We trade direction for distraction, and before we know it, we're exhausted, but not fulfilled. So we have to ask ourselves, what am I actually building? Not just this week, not just this quarter, but over the next 5, 10, 20 years. Who am I becoming in the process? I met a woman once who worked in public health. She spent years developing community programs that most people never saw. Quiet work, uncelebrated. But one day she told me something that stuck with me. If I do my job well, nothing bad happens. That's how I know I'm making a difference. Her impact wasn't in the headlines, it was in the lives she protected before anything went wrong. That's what long-term thinkers understand. Success isn't always visible, but it's always intentional. Correct thinking means living today with tomorrow in mind. It means asking, if I keep doing this every day, what will it lead to? Whether it's how you lead a team, raise a family, build a product, or shape a career, those small choices compound. The habits you reinforce, the relationships you nurture, the values you defend, they're all seeds. You may not see the results right away, but that doesn't mean they're not growing. There's a reason most people give up too soon. They expect the harvest in the same season they planted the seed, but growth doesn't work like that. It's invisible before it's undeniable. You don't see the roots, you don't see the depth being formed. All you see is silence. And in that silence, people quit. But correct thinkers know that silence is part of the process. That just because something isn't loud doesn't mean it's not working. They stay the course. They make decisions not based on how they feel in the moment, but based on the future they're committed to. I once worked with a leader who ran a small organization with big dreams. When others were focused on next month's numbers, he was planning for the next decade. Not with spreadsheets, but with values. He hired slowly, he trained thoroughly, he protected the culture, and yes, they lost a few opportunities along the way, they missed a few fast wins, but 10 years later, that organization didn't just survive, it became a standard others aspired to. Why? Because it was built on principles, not panic. And here's what's beautiful, thinking long-term doesn't mean you stop acting today. In fact, it makes your actions sharper, more intentional. You don't just react to the day, you lead it. Every small act becomes part of a bigger picture. Every conversation, every habit, every decision is a brushstroke on the canvas of your future. But you have to keep showing up. You have to be okay with the fact that most days won't feel glamorous, that progress is often boring, that no one claps when you choose consistency over chaos. But over time, those quiet decisions stack up. They build trust, they build strength, they build legacy. It's not about perfection, it's about direction. We all want meaningful lives. We all want to leave something behind. But that doesn't happen by accident. It happens by design. And that design starts with thinking not just about what you want now, but what you want most. The person you want to become, the story you want to tell with your life. So ask yourself, if I keep thinking this way, if I keep acting this way, where will I be in 10 years? Will I be proud of the decisions I'm making today? Will the people around me be better for how I showed up? Correct thinking doesn't just chase what's urgent, it pursues what's essential. It says no to shortcuts, not because it's noble, but because it's smart. Because it knows the shortcut today becomes the setback tomorrow. It sees beyond the next sale, the next goal, the next applause, and locks onto something deeper. It commits to the process, not just because it works, but because it matters. And if you're wondering where to start, you don't have to have it all figured out. Just start by choosing to live today like it counts, because it does. Every word, every step, every effort. It all adds up. Think long term. Act every day. That's how you build something that lasts. That's how you build something that matters. That's how you change everything. In a world that moves faster than ever, where speed is praised and hustle is a badge of honor, the idea of slowing down sounds almost irresponsible. We're told to move fast, respond faster, think on our feet, keep up or get left behind. It's become the rhythm of modern life, louder, quicker, busier. But the question we rarely ask is, what's the cost of all this speed? We rush to respond before we understand, because we jump to conclusions before we explore possibilities. We act before we align. And somewhere in that constant motion, we lose the very thing that makes thinking powerful: clarity. We confuse movement with momentum. But they're not the same. True progress isn't about how quickly you move, it's about how deeply you think before you act. The best decisions aren't made in a hurry. They're made in the space between urgency and wisdom. And that space only exists when we slow down. I once sat with a CEO during a crisis. Her company was under pressure: financial strain, media scrutiny, internal panic. The instinct naturally was to act fast. Everyone wanted answers. Fix it now, announce a solution. But she didn't. She called her team together and said 5 words no one expected: "We're not deciding today." There was confusion in the room, concern, even frustration. But she wasn't being indecisive. She was being intentional. She knew that a rush decision might feel good in the moment, but cause more damage in the long run. So instead they paused, they listened, they gathered real information, they asked better questions. And when they finally acted, their decision was measured, grounded, and lasting. That's the power of slowing down. It doesn't mean you lack urgency. It means you respect consequence. Correct thinking demands reflection. It demands time to explore not just what's happening, but why it's happening. To understand not just what's visible, but what's under the surface. And you can't do that at full speed. There's a reason some of the greatest breakthroughs in history happened during moments of stillness. It wasn't in the noise of the boardroom or the rush of the factory floor. It was in the quiet, in the walk through the woods, the pause between meetings, the hour taken to think with no distractions. Slowing down isn't a weakness, it's a strategy. When you slow down, you notice more. You ask better questions. You listen more deeply. You connect the dots others miss. And in doing so, you gain an advantage that speed alone can never provide: perspective. Think of it like driving in fog. The faster you go, the more dangerous it becomes. But when you slow down, you see just far enough to keep moving safely. You don't need to see the whole road, just the next few feet. Correct thinking works the same way. It doesn't promise instant clarity, but when you slow down, you create space for the next step to reveal itself. I once worked with a team launching a new product. They had the budget, the excitement, the green light, but something felt rushed. They were sprinting toward the launch date without fully testing the assumptions underneath their strategy. So they made a bold decision to pause for 30 days, not to stall, but to dig deeper. They used that time to listen to users, refine their messaging, pressure test their assumptions. It was uncomfortable. It felt like stepping backward. But when they finally launched, their product resonated at a level they hadn't expected. Why? Because they slowed down, not to delay, but to prepare. That's what most people misunderstand. Slowing down doesn't mean doing nothing. It means doing the right things at the right pace. It means resisting the urge to act just for the sake of acting. We live in a culture that treats thinking as unproductive. If you're not replying, reacting, or producing, it can feel like you're falling behind. But that's a dangerous illusion. Some of the most effective leaders, the most innovative thinkers, are not the ones who always have their hands on the wheel. They're the ones who take the time to step back, look out the window, and ask, where are we really going? Because it's not just about moving fast, it's about moving in the right direction. Speed can be seductive. It makes us feel in control. It gives the illusion of progress. But speed without clarity leads to burnout, confusion, and misalignment. You can run faster than everyone else and still be running in the wrong direction. Correct thinking demands that we build in pauses, not as a luxury, but as a necessity. It means learning to say, let me think about that, even when everyone's looking for immediate answers. It means taking time to ask, what's the bigger picture, before jumping into solutions. It means trusting that reflection is not time lost, it's wisdom gained. The people who truly master their craft, whether they're artists, athletes, entrepreneurs, or leaders, aren't always the fastest movers. They're the most deliberate. They know that greatness is not built in haste, it's built in rhythm. And rhythm requires space between the notes. I once spoke with a firefighter who explained how the most experienced responders enter a burning building. Not by rushing in blindly, but by taking a moment to scan, assess, and breathe. That brief pause can mean the difference between chaos and control, between risk and readiness. It's no different in our daily lives. Whether we're making a major decision, leading a team, or navigating a challenge, those few seconds of thoughtful pause often lead to the most powerful outcomes. So how do we slow down in a world that never stops? We start small. Take 5 quiet minutes before your day begins, not to check your phone, but to check your thoughts. Step away from the noise when a decision feels rushed. Ask more questions before offering more opinions. Give yourself permission to wait, not forever, just long enough to make sure your next move isn't just fast, but wise. Correct thinking isn't about how quickly you can respond, it's about how deeply you understand what matters. Because in the end, slowing down isn't about being left behind, it's about making sure you're leading from the right place. So, slow down, to listen better, to think clearer, to choose wiser, because that's how you speed up, not just for a moment, but for the long road ahead, and that's how everything changes.